I'm Alan Johnson. I'm the Labour MP for Hull West and Hessle, and I'm the chair of Labour in for Britain. Up until June the 23rd, we're kind of on the Prime Minister's side on this issue. And it's too important, too profound for us to have taken a party political position just for the sake of it. God, to desert our friends in Europe just because, Cameron ended up recommending. We always knew he would recommend going in, because no Prime Minister in his right mind, and we can say a lot about Cameron, but he's certainly in his right mind, would ever want Britain to leave the European Union. I voted in 75. My union was very pro-European as well, much like Usdaw is. The trade union movement was split, as the Labour movement was split right down the middle. But my union was always seized with that post-war, never let it happen again. That jaw instead of war, as Churchill put it. And that's where, the European coal and steel community is where all this stems from. And it was a very important part of keeping the peace. So that was always the biggest issue for me. And for my 3 young kids, toddlers in 75, I thought, what kind of world do I want them to grow up in? And I think the people and then there were 9 member states. There was no Channel Tunnel, no World Trade Organization. Now the world's more increasingly dependent. Now there's 28 member states, and now you have the social dimension to Europe, which didn't come along until the 80s. And I think, as I said in the speech, that's the main reason why many people who were against in 75 are for now, and why the party is so remarkably united on this issue. There's absolutely no evidence for that whatsoever. They can't say what Britain would look like outside the European Union. I mean, the ones that are really honest say, yeah, there'll be some turmoil. Turmoil? Christ, I'll say. We lose every trade agreement. We have to renegotiate all these trade agreements. Foreign investment, which is already starting to dry up in this country, takes a hit. And in the meantime, what are we scrambling to get back to? We're scrambling to get back to exactly where we were before. And so there is no realistic scenario. You've got Go with his Albanian idea. You've got Boris, who was talking about Canada as the 7 years it took to get a trade deal between Canada and the EU, and it doesn't cover whole swathes like services, and half the 1,400-page document that is the agreement are the exemptions and the things that will still carry tariffs. There's no sensible idea, and there's no sensible, reputable analysis that says we're going to be better off outside the European Union. The best they can do is say, well, at some time in the distance, after we've got through all this, we'll be all right. Getting through all this is going to affect our people. It's going to affect the people in the Usdaw conference there. It's going to affect working people. It won't be people like Boris Johnson or whoever who lose their jobs. It'll be people like the ones you represent in Usdaw. I think in the end, the issue will be looking at the paucity of the other side's argument. So even if there are people who are concerned about free movement, even though it's two-way, even though no other European country has as many of its citizens living and working in other developed countries than Britain, free movement seems to be a big issue with lots of our people. And you can understand it. One of your delegates raised exploitation, fairness, and we can tackle that inside the EU. So given that I know people who are concerned about that, but are not concerned about it enough to risk the economy and to risk jobs and to risk our prosperity on it. And anyway, they see that all the different formulas for what we would look like outside Britain, whether it's Norway, whether it's Switzerland or whatever, include free movement. So I think the biggest issue for them, they're going to try and come back to it over and over again, is immigration. The biggest issue for us is about jobs, the economy and our national security. I think all of those three have an equal salience for people in this argument. And I think that in the end that will win the day. It does have a reforming agenda, but the point I keep making to colleagues is there's nothing on that ballot paper that says, oh, and put in here what you'd like to see. It's either stay or go. I mean, that's the simple question. And between now and June the 23rd, we shouldn't be highlighting what's wrong with Europe. We've got the Daily Mail to do that for us. They've been doing it for 20 years. We should be saying what's right about Europe, but making the fundamental argument, of course it needs reform. So does the Palace of Westminster. So does the United Nations. So does NATO. There's no institution that doesn't need reform. You can only reform it and influence that reform if you're in. So yes, there are things we want to do. Jeremy touched on them in his speech a couple of weeks ago. I touched on some of them there with the Agency Workers Directive. We want to expand the social dimension of Europe, not reduce it, like most of the Leave side want to do. But now is the time to be making the positive arguments for Europe, not adding to a catalogue of lists that are wrong with it. Of course, I think Obama, is big enough and good-looking enough to look after himself, and he did it very well. He's the president of US. US soldiers spilt blood on our continent to come and deal with the problems of the Second World War that were our problems, that we started between European nations. They put money into the Marshall Plan. Where would we have been without the Marshall Plan? They've been good friends, good allies. And when the Leave side is saying, oh, we can get all these wonderful trade deals with America, you should expect the President of the United States to actually have a view on that. And that view he expressed. He expressed it as a friend. And I think it was a very important contribution. I'd say Europe started off as a measure to stop wars in Europe happening again. It spread peace, democracy, the rule of law to countries that had never experienced it. But at the same time, through that single market, it's given us the opportunity to trade into a market of 550 million people. Vote to stay with the international community, not to walk off into splendid isolation.